Good afternoon and welcome to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Lecture, co-sponsored by the Akron Summit County Public Library and the Eta Tau Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. It is my pleasure to welcome you today. I am Pam Hickson Stevenson. I'm the Executive Director of the Library System, and it is truly an honor to be here with our panel of greeters, and particularly with Bishop Joey Johnson, our keynote speaker today. I would particularly like to acknowledge our Board of Trustees, the Eta Tau Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, for the ongoing and continuing support for this lecture series. I also am grateful to Mayor Daniel Horrigan and County Executive Eileen Shapiro for being here this afternoon to extend their greetings to our audience. I also would like to welcome any other elected officials who have joined us this afternoon. With our session today set up as a webinar, I don't know if you're on or not, but please consider yourself welcomed. A couple of things to note before we get started with other comments from other community leaders. First of all, the format for this lecture today is a lecture. It is a single individual, Bishop Joey Johnson, with some slides that you will be able to view. There will be a very brief Q&A following Bishop Johnson's remarks that will be moderated by Charles Parnell of the fraternity, and myself will be tag teaming, going back and forth a bit with questions. And then finally, I wanted to make sure that you all are aware that this event is not being live streamed to Facebook, but the recording that is being made will be posted on the library's Facebook page sometime early next week. I want to also encourage you to use the question and answer or Q&A function to submit your questions. The chat function in this Zoom webinar is disabled. So again, please use the Q&A function if you have questions that you would like to submit for consideration to ask Bishop Johnson. It is now my great pleasure to introduce Bernie Rochford, who is the president of the Library Board of Trustees. Bernie?
Thank you, Pam. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Akron Summit County Public Library, I want to welcome you to this year's Martin Luther King Jr. program. The library has been a partner with the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity in bringing this celebration of Dr. Reverend King's legacy. I want to recognize and thank the library staff for their dedication to serving our community. These past 2 years have been especially challenging, as you all know. The library staff have continued to provide needed services and programs to people of all ages in our community. This lecture series has seen a variety of esteemed speakers from the local community and the nation, from Julian Bond and Cicely Tyson to Amelia Sykes and the late Dorothy Jackson, who left us this year. The lectures have been informative and inspirational. The Board of Trustees and library staff are committed to working with the community to continue to bring these events to enlighten Summit County residents. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Bernie. It is next my pleasure and honor to introduce Mayor Daniel Horrigan, Mayor of the City of Akron, for his greetings.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you, Bernie. Good afternoon to all, and thank you all for taking part in today's lecture as we remember Dr. King and his lasting impact on our own community and really across the world. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's keynote speaker, Bishop Johnson, for all of his work over the past 18 months, and not really over the last 18 months, but really his lifetime, as he has chaired our city's Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force. The ask from me was not an easy one, but Bishop has certainly stepped up, along with all of the committee members, to the challenge to put a tremendous amount of work over the last year and a half to come up with substantial recommendations for me and my administration. Today's lecture will deal with health, and what could be more fitting as we find ourselves still in the grips of the COVID-19 pandemic. I think all of us have been touched by the pandemic in one way or another, but especially communities of color, have certainly been disproportionately impacted. In the summer of 2020, when I worked with the Akron City Council and especially President Margot Somerville to declare racism as a public health crisis, it was in part because of the systemic inequities that exist in our systems, especially in communities of color in health outcomes. And why do African Americans suffer from hypertension, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, asthma, or even COVID at 2 to 3 times more than white Americans? What we know and what we are working to correct is that it's racism, not race, that causes the disproportionately higher rates of homelessness and incarceration. When we talk about being equitable in all of our decision-making and being intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is an effort to address these long-standing inequities in communities of color. Efforts like our full-term first birthday initiative focus on lessening the gap between the birth outcomes between Black and white babies. And programs like Rubber City Match, Mortar at Bounce, and Elevate Greater Akron, among many others, aim to empower Akron's Black population to engage in our region's growth and prosperity. Over 50 years ago, Dr. King captured the attention of the nation and the world as a proponent of social justice. His words are as relevant and impactful today as they were during the civil rights movement. As our city, along with the rest of the nation, continues to reckon with issues of racial injustice and equity, may we take pause on this day, and really every day, to remember Dr. King's life and legacy, and let us continuously recommit ourselves to the difficult but essential work of calling out injustice wherever it persists. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Mayor Horrigan. Next, it is my pleasure and honor to introduce our County Executive, Eileen Shapiro. Executive?
Good afternoon, all. Each year we gather together to celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You know, few Americans can lay claim to have had such meaningful and lasting impact on our nation as Dr. King had and continues to have, even decades after his life on this earth was tragically cut so short. Coming together each year to reflect, to be reminded of the lessons of the past, and to look at the future is a fitting tribute and plays such an important part in honoring Dr. King's legacy and keeping his work alive. During his lifetime, he held an unprecedented movement speaking truth to power and inspiring Black Americans and others across this land to stand up for equity for all people. And he made the ultimate sacrifice. He gave his life to the struggle for racial equality. And although he no longer walks this earth with us, his spirit is with us as we face a nation with still so much to do to make his dream a reality. Time has passed, but the issue still persists. Progress has been made, but not enough. The future is upon us, and we bear responsibility for working together to create a better, more equitable community right here in Summit County, one that Dr. King would be proud of. Many of you with us today are working to make that difference, taking action, developing plans, communicating in ways in which we can hear each other. And for that, I thank you. Yes, we still have much work to do, but I do believe we are in a better place than we were when we met last year. And I also believe we will be in an even better place when we gather together next year. While we still look to Dr. King's words and mission to guide us, we must continue to work together to move Summit County towards truly a place being where all people can live out their dreams, no matter the color of their skin. I want to thank everybody that worked to bring us together today. It is my honor to be celebrating this Martin Luther King Day with you all. Shortly, you will hear from Bishop Joey Johnson, one of our community's most impactful, committed, and caring leaders. We are grateful to have leaders in our community like Bishop Johnson that help to guide us on our journey. I wish you all good health and good fortune in the new year. Thank you all.
Thank you, Executive Shapiro. And finally, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce President Jamal Ham. He is president of the Eta Tau Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. He will be next introducing Bishop Johnson for his remarks today. Jamal?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone with us today. I pray that you and your families remain safe and healthy during these COVID times. My name is Brother Jamal Helm, and I am the current president of the Eta Tau Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, residing here in Akron, Ohio. The Brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Eta Tau Lambda chapter would like to welcome you to the MLK Lecture series. The Brothers of Eta Tau Lambda chapter has resided in this community for over 61 years now. Even throughout COVID, we have continued to provide community service, mentorship, and housing to the Akron community. I would also like to thank our partners, the Akron Public Library, for hosting this event with us for over 37 years now. Today, I stand before you leaning and standing on the shoulders of our good brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Brother King was not only a leader of the civil rights movement, but he was also a brother of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. This event over the years has produced some dynamic speakers, and this year's speaker will not disappoint you as well. Our speaker today is Bishop Joey Johnson. Bishop Johnson is the presiding bishop of the Bethel Fellowship of Visionary Churches and organizer and senior pastor of the House of the Lord in Akron, Ohio. Bishop Johnson is a renowned Bible scholar, counselor, educator, conference speaker, and workshop facilitator. His experience in leading one of the city's largest churches for 46 years has equipped him to impact the wisdom for issues related to church growth and development, business management, leadership, and team building. He has been a certified grief recovery specialist since 2002. As a visionary, Bishop Johnson founded the Johnson Leadership Institute, where he utilizes his skills to train and mentor pastors and other church leaders. And he also founded the Emmanuel Christian Academy and Logos Bible Institute to present opportunities to children and adults to be educated and equipped in God's word. He is the chair and chief relational trustee of the City of Akron Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force, which is tasked to offer suggestions to the city. As Bishop Johnson increasingly ministers to the community of faith, not only in the city of Akron, but around the world, his participation and influence in the community continues to grow on many levels. One example of this is his commitment to attacking and solving problems of poverty in our city. To do this, Bishop Johnson continues to humbly invite city and state leaders to sit at the same table. He has embraced, with the good of all mankind, the role of being a host of conversations. Bishop Johnson authored 11 books and is married to Pastor Kathy Johnson. Without further ado, I present to you Bishop Joey Johnson.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Brother Jamal. I appreciate that introduction, and to the county executive, to the mayor. I want to thank the Akron Summit County Public Library and the Eta Tau Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity for the invitation to be a part of this prestigious lecture series. I do not take it lightly. I do not take it for granted. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a Baptist preacher, philosopher, intellectual, and civil rights activist, among others. And the omnipresence of his quotes reflect not only their rhetorical power, but their abiding moral authority. King's quotes are often as poignant, as powerful, and as relevant today as they were 55 years ago. On March 25th, 1966, in Chicago, at a press conference before his speech at the Second Convention of the Medical Committee for Human Rights, King said this, in part, "We are concerned about the constant use of federal funds to support the most notorious expression of segregation. Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhuman because it often results in physical death. I see no other alternative to direct action and creative nonviolence to raise the conscience of a nation," end of quote. Dr. King was always very specific and intentional in his wording. But interestingly, there are 3 or more versions of this quote. We may never know exactly what Dr. King said, but in the light of his civil rights work, there are 3 observations that seem pertinent this afternoon. If King said injustice in health rather than injustice in health care, his unfailing attention to poverty, to racism, to education and housing, what we now call social determinants of health, suggests that his concern was beyond healthcare alone. It seems that King had anticipated and inadvertently prophesied a change that is taking place today. While the medical community has ever better tools to manage diseases like diabetes, African Americans are living longer, but with more serious illness. This is one reason that the medical community is switching their focus from healthcare to the broader role of health. The medical community has added years to our lives, but not necessarily healthy years. There is no doubt that we still need to fight for better access to affordable and equitable healthcare, but there is a growing body of evidence that social conditions matter. In fact, as important as healthcare is, some studies put the impact of healthcare on health as low as 10%. Health is outside the scope of traditional healthcare, even though there are many social determinants of health. Let's briefly highlight some social determinants of health. You're probably aware of the Kaiser Permanente study on adverse childhood experiences, where experiences of childhood abuse and neglect have been implicated in premature death. Furthermore, we have a whole host of healthy behaviors that we need to give attention to, and health impacting behaviors like tobacco usage, our activity level, healthy weight, fruit and vegetable consumption, adequate sleep, exposure to sunlight, and exposure to toxins. Often health planners choose to focus on a few big ones like tobacco usage or obesity or activity level. We have forgotten a lot of things that we brought with us from Africa. Mother Louise Hale used to be a member of my church, and she used to make me ASAFOETIDA. At least that's what I thought she was saying. It was an awful, and it was a bottle that the ingredient said was turpentine and should not be ingested. I'd be trying to run from Mother Hale because she'd be saying, Pastor, did I hear you coughing? I said, no, Mother Hale. No, you didn't. She said, oh, yes, I did. I'm going to make you some ASAFOETIDA. I mentioned this in church one time, and one of my members, Brother Henry Sanders, found a reference on the web and emailed it to me. ASAFOETIDA bags, small bags stuffed with pungent herbs and other ingredients, were worn to ward off disease and evil spirits and to treat asthma, colds, or other respiratory ailments. The name derives from ASAFOETIDA, a gum derived from the roots of the leek-like FERULA ASAFOETIDA plant that was a key ingredient in the bags. These charms were common throughout the southern Appalachians and across the entire South, and in the varying dialects of the region could be pronounced ASAFOETIDA or ASAFOETIDA, ASAFOETIDA, or it could be anything like that. She said ASAFOETIDA. It has a history that goes back to the 8th century BCE, and it's used as a remedy for several digestive and respiratory ailments throughout North Africa. The pungent odor of these charms is still strongly memorable to anyone who has to remember wearing one, or even remembers being around anybody wearing one. This ASAFOETIDA is traditional use, and it has a pharmacological activity and impact. Recent studies, including this topical use, has shown that ASAFOETIDA produces several activities such as antioxidant, antiviral, antifungal, cancer chemopreventative, anti-diabetic, antispasmodic, and you could go on and on. It has great medicinal importance. Unfortunately, we have walked away from the herbal medicines of African derivation. Healthcare departments are beginning to step up to the challenge. And among many of the areas of the focus, here are some that are starting to come into play now. That the neighborhoods are safe for walking and biking. That the buildings are free of mold, allergens, and lead. That people without cars have access to healthy and convenient foods. That homeless people would find stable housing. That smokers have access to effective cessation programs. That preschoolers have access to high quality health care, and that parents learn to manage the stresses in their life. In short, health planners are trying to improve health by improving lives. And we're not going to spend any time talking about COVID-19. That's a whole thing in and of itself. But in fact, we are learning that even genes aren't immutable. Breastfeeding can have an impact on obesity in adulthood. We're talking about an area which we have shrunk down and may not be giving a great enough exposure to. Yet think, there's another area of health that I think is perennially overlooked, and that's racism. On June the 5th, 2020, as the mayor said, the city of Akron, like other municipalities, declared racism a public health crisis in response to the death of George Floyd and other conditions. A public health crisis is declared when an infection or other condition threatens to overwhelm customary health care capabilities. COVID is an example. Periodically, COVID-19 has overwhelmed our hospitals as it is doing right now. It is a public health crisis. However, racism not only overwhelms our healthcare capacities and capabilities, but it also overwhelms the health of African Americans and affects America. To begin with, let's look at racism impact upon the social determinants of health. The correlation between socioeconomic adversities and poor health outcomes is well documented. Healthy people, a healthy portion at promotion and disease prevention initiative of the United States Department of Health and Human Services groups social determinants of health into 5 categories, and I think they're powerful. Number 1, economic stability. Having a lower unstable income affects the ability of individuals and families to afford health care, healthy foods, and housing. I've been doing a lot of reading in this area. And one of the things we need to understand is that racism impacts every area of African-American lives, whether they want to talk about it or not, whether they bring it up or not. Number 2, education, access, and quality. Individuals with lower levels of education are generally less healthy and live shorter lives than those with higher levels of education. Next, healthcare access and quality. Factors, including a lack of insurance, make some individuals less likely to have primary care and have a primary care provider and to be able to afford treatments and medication. I had my congregation dying laughing as I told them I had a toothache, and my dentist unfortunately died, and I didn't have any ability to go to a new dentist. I finally found a new dentist in pain, and he didn't treat me like my other dentist. When I stood at the counter, the receptionist says $728, and I almost swallowed my tongue. I mean, now you want that much now? But I don't have the problem that many have, that we could overlook when you're a middle-class person. The choice between healthcare or food, the choice between medicine or food. And so as we look at that, we need to be aware of that impact. Next, neighborhood and built environment. Individuals who live in neighborhoods with high rates of violence and unsafe air or water, as well as those who work in dangerous work environments, face greater health and safety risks. They face them more than others. Next, and finally, social and community context. A lack of support from family, from friends, from coworkers, and the community negatively impact the health and the well-being of all people, and particularly African Americans. Allow me to touch on another area of health, There is accumulating evidence that religiosity is an important coping resource for people, for African Americans, and particularly for older African Americans. Let me just touch on this for a moment and be self-serving, because when I started pastoring the church at 48 years ago, I couldn't, I mean, they were talking about me, that little boy over there, whatever. I couldn't believe that that March the 8th, I'll be 70 years old. So I'm not that little boy anymore. I'm now a senior. Prayer is often a coping mechanism for older African Americans. Some studies identify positive correlation between well-being or adjustment and religion. There is also a correlation between religion and reduction of stress. Harvey Cohen, 2000, in his book, Taking Care After 50, a self-care guide for seniors, has a section on spirituality entitled Reach for Religion as a Coping Strategy. He found that regular attendance in church, synagogue, or other religious services lengthens one's life, controlling for factors such as smoking, age, and chronic conditions. As a pastor, forgive me, if I give this shameless plug, no, I'm going to refrain. I'll just say older Americans who attend church or religious meetings every week live 28% longer than those who stay at home. Attending these religious services provides social support, strengthens their immune system, decreases blood pressure, decreases the incidence of stroke and depression, while increasing better compliance with medication. Attending religious services supports spirituality as a coping strategy that may assist older adults with life's difficulties and uncertainties. There's also a positive relationship between emotional well-being and self-transcendence for older adults who attend religious meetings, which may include a decrease in depression. I mean, this is serious. Better feelings of health than those who did not attend, and age-friendly connectedness as a source of social well-being. Therefore, it is physically, emotionally, and spiritually healthy to engage in spirituality and religion. In short, let me just put it so everybody can get it. Going to church for older African Americans is healthy. Let me go back to the words of Dr. King. King may have been suggesting something different in his use of the word inhuman as opposed to the word inhumane. The word inhumane suggests a lack of compassion or human suffering or pain, of compassion for that. Whereas the word inhuman suggests a denial of humanity so egregiously cruel that it should not be. On April 26, 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to students at Glenville High School in Cleveland. It's a quote that I don't think many people are aware of, but it is a powerful quote. And it says, "Now, this is all I'm saying this morning, that we must feel that we count, that we belong, that we are persons, that we are children of the living God. And it means that we must go down in our soul and find that somebodyness. And we must never again be ashamed of ourselves. We must never be ashamed of the color of our skin. Black is as beautiful as any color, and we must believe it." End of quote. We've got to go deep down in our soul and find that somebodyness. I got a book coming out entitled The Struggle for African American Identity, The Struggle for Somebodyness. We must feel that we are a culture of children of the living God. And the struggle for somebodyness has been going on since 1619, when we were brought to this country and changed, and it continues today. Now, might I add that there were African slaves in the place that would become America as early as 1400, even though we pick out 1619. The choice for Black people has always been the same: humanity or inhumanity. We have been compelled to struggle for our humanity or accept inhumanity. There is no in between. It is important to understand that we don various roles during the week, but on Sunday morning, we dress up and we become somebody. And it's important to our health. Somebodyness is an underrated concept that enhances our identity and our health. Sometimes when I'm talking to people at church, they're like, you know, why you gotta be called deacon so-and-so? Why? Because he may not be anything at work. He may not be anything in other areas of his life, but at the church, he is somebody, she is somebody. It is my contention that our identity, our health, and our resiliency is found in the African motor behaviors that we brought with us from Africa and practiced in the invisible church in the brush harbors. Sometimes they're called brush harbors, whether we're talking about ring dancing or call and response or Negro spirituals or speaking in tongues. I talk about all of that in the book that's going to be coming out. Those are the foundations of our identity. Let's return one final time to King's word. Omitted from some popular versions of the quote are the words, because it often results in physical death. This makes it plain that human lives end because of injustice. King is not just discussing health care or health systems, but the detrimental impact of injustice upon health that often ends lives. In the Bible, justice is about right relationship with God, self, others, and God's creation. Right relationship with God has health benefits. Right relationship with oneself has health benefits. Right relationship with others has health benefits. And right relationship with God's creation also has health benefits. Although we continue to struggle politically, socially, emotionally, psychologically for justice, King would give it a would give a biblical call to justice. The Bible verse that he used and most often quoted was Amos 5:24. I'll use this particular version, but let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. With all that we've touched on, just return to King's quote. We are concerned that the constant use of federal funds to support the most notorious expression of segregation, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhuman because it often results in physical death. I see no alternative to direct action and creative nonviolence to raise the conscience of a nation. We don't just need affordable and equitable health care. We need African-American health. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Bishop Johnson, for those thought-provoking and inspiring comments. We do appreciate you taking some time from your busy schedule to meet with us today. Charles Parnell and I will be kicking off some Q&A. He and I each developed some questions to get things started. And I'd like to remind our audience that if they have questions that they'd like to ask, they may submit them by using the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So I will go ahead and ask the first one. This was prearranged in a conversation with Mr. Parnell yesterday. You mentioned the federal initiative, Healthy People, in your presentation. And you also commented that you've been doing a lot of reading on this topic. So would you please share with us any specific examples or ideas which you've read about or actually seen that other communities have successfully implemented to address social determinants of health that then have improved health outcomes for their African-American residents?
Great question. I'm going to see if I can do that on Sunday afternoon at age 70 after I preach this morning, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, I think that there are a number. I'm going to start with the city of Akron. I think that trying to deal with those who have early childhood impact upon our children. I think we've got some programs that are beginning to work in that area, trying to impact and make sure that we don't have premature deaths in our community. I think there are any number of initiatives around our nation for dealing with youth and beginning to have an impact. Now, that's a very big area, and it's an area that's causing a lot of impact. But I believe that we've got some people that are making some impact, and the city of Akron right now is heading up and putting together an initiative to begin to have impact in that area. The church always has an impact in that area because the church is the clearinghouse for a lot of the things that are going on. Let me mention one in particular. One of the things that we've been doing is with COVID-19 is being the place where you can get your vaccine, being the place where you can get a kit, a testing kit, being the place where we are more trying to make sure that these kinds of things are handed to or placed with our community. And it's tough because our people don't always have the resources to make it where they are or to do. We just think everybody does, but often everybody doesn't. Everybody doesn't have internet. Everybody doesn't have a car. We assume that they do. And so the church has been a big part of that. And right now we're ramping up even more to make sure that we're helping people. And I'd like to just say this so you'll know, so you can pray for me. So I'm taking it pretty hard right now because I'm telling people, if you know that I love you and I'm your pastor, would you consider getting a vaccine? And there are so many conspiracy theories and so much pushback that I'm just going to go ahead and take my licking and keep on ticking because I want to see people be healthy.
Thank you, Bishop Johnson. I'll take the second question here. How can we take a proactive approach as a community to recognize that mental health conditions, mental health awareness are just as important as physical health conditions?
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful question. I mean, I can't think of anything probably more important right now than mental health. And COVID has exacerbated already existing problems. And so I think what we have to do is put an all-out effort. In the African-American community, what we have to do is demystify and decriminalize going to get help. Because in the African-American community, if you try to get help, the first thing they're going to say about you is you're crazy. What are you going to a counselor for? I mean, why are you doing? So we have to create and make sure that it's all right. Give permission to people to be able to go get that kind of help. In the nation, we have to provide, in the city, we have to provide resources for people to get this help because once again, they don't always have insurance. They might not always be able to pay for what needs to be done, but we must provide for people the help they need right now. I got a series coming up entitled The Peace of God, the Safeguard of Our Sanity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk about trauma because right now people are traumatized and yet they don't know they're traumatized. And I had my first impact with trauma about 20 years ago on vacation, coming down in Florida, and I had a panic attack and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was just like, oh my God, what's happening? I told my wife, the world's closing in on me. I need to get off this plane. And she looked at me, she said, what's wrong with you? I said, I don't know, but I'm getting ready to get off the plane. She said, you can't get off the plane, we're flying. I said, watch me, I'm getting ready to get off. And she grabbed my hand and probably began to pray. And when I finally got off, I called a counselor and I began to deal with what was triggering this kind of impact. And so we need to help people who are having this and they don't know they're having it. Another thing I'm going to do is involve in that series adverse childhood experiences to try to help people understand why they might be experiencing what they're experiencing now. Those are great questions.
All right, we do have questions coming in from some of our attendees, so let me go to the first one in that list. Dr. Martha Banks has asked or has stated, I agree that it is critical, especially for older African Americans, to benefit from a supportive church. We must make every effort to keep churches healthy. Can you address ways in which we identify healthy churches? And then I'm going to add a second one because it's closely related. Bishop mentioned the reasons seniors should attend church, but how can those benefits happen when for some seniors, it's not safe to attend church?
Let me start, a great question. Let me start with the last one first. If you are immunocompromised, you should not be coming. You should be taking advantage of every health and safety protocol that has been recommended. So that's not possible for you to come, but we have so many other media opportunities now. You can get on Facebook, you can use the phone, you can use all of these things, Zoom, in order to continue to have whatever impact and interaction you can have at the level you are. At church, I believe that one of the things we need to do is make sure that we are safe. Now, at our church, I'm going to get in trouble, but I'm just telling you what we're doing. We have temperature taking, we have masks, we have physical distancing. We're going to take every precaution to make sure that you are safe when you come. And some are not doing that. I'm not going to criticize them. I'm just going to say at my house, we're going to try to make it as safe as possible. And when you come, some people probably don't believe this. Coming out and looking in people's eyes and being able to see them is better than simply sitting at home. If you're not immunocompromised, I think you'll find out that coming out has some impact upon you for the positive. Healthy churches. Let me say that that's such a great question, because believe it or not, there are unhealthy churches, just like everything else. There are unhealthy foods, there are unhealthy doctors, just like anything else. And I think the most important thing for a church is that a church that believes in the Bible, that preaches and lifts up Jesus and God, a church that is concerned about helping and lifting people. If you're not a Christian, you're of another denomination or another persuasion, a church that helps people, that looks to their ultimate power, to their higher power, in order to move for love and for well-being, not for anything else. I think that those things are very important as you hook in, as you connect, because connectivity is really the important thing. Relationships are really what's important. And seniors who are separated now and may not be able to get out, who may not be living with anyone, who may not have a husband or a wife or children, this can be pretty impacting.
Bishop Johnson, you spoke about the connection between racism, injustices, and the impact that it has on health and healthcare. Your recommendations or suggestions on ways in which we can speak to our youth about racism and injustice?
Yes, that is probably one of the most difficult, intractable problems that we have right now. And that is that many millennials, many young people have disengaged from the church because the church is not speaking to their issues. They're irrelevant as far as they're concerned. And what we must do is move in and begin to understand what's relevant to those younger people so that we can speak to them at that level. One of the things that I end up doing, and was the reason I do so much reading, is so I can know where they are, what they're talking about, what's important to them, to be able to interact with them at that particular level. I think that one of the things that I've often run into that makes it very difficult is that when you don't know your history, you don't know how important the African American church has been. You don't know the role that it played. And so we must somehow get that over to African American youth. Let me say this from a civil rights perspective, because sometimes when we begin to talk about this, it causes problems, because we talk about baby boomers, busters, and those are for white people. That's not for us. God bless white people. I love them. I don't have any problem. But that's for white folks. That's not for us. What we have is pre-civil rights folks and post-civil rights folks. See, for us, civil rights is a very important part of my life. But for the younger people, they don't know anything about civil rights. They may not have ever studied it. They may not have ever. So here's the two things I ask, Brother Charles, when people come to church. If you're an older person, you're a senior, civil rights is very important to you. Make room at the table for the younger folks who may not know anything about civil rights so that we can help them to learn. Then I ask the young folks, when you come to the table, please don't tear it down, because it's important to us. And when we can come together and begin to have those kinds of dialogues, I think it's going to really benefit and lift up our young people, because believe it or not, they're struggling. They don't have the basis, the foundation for the identity that they need to have. And so if we can walk with them, not down them, talk to them where they are, I think we can make some impact.
Thank you.
Here's another question from one of our audience members. Many policymakers continue to view and shape healthcare legislation based on healthcare being a privilege. Until we view healthcare as a right of all people, inequalities will continue. Could you please address this privilege of health?
Yeah, I believe that what we have is exactly as the person stated. We are treating this as some kind of a privilege. I don't think it's a privilege. I think it's a right. I think every person should have health care. Every person should have the right to be able to be taken care of and to go to a doctor or whatever. But part of the reason we have that problem is because I think there's a major area that we need to work on, and that is Americans have the penchant of solving problems from the top down. So they solve them from leaders saying this is what needs to happen to people beneath them without talking to those people, without having those people at the table, without knowing what their issues are. The more we can get people at the table at the grassroots level, the more we can hear what the real issues are, and the more we can relate to what might actually be going on. I just did something for City Council that comes out of a book called The Obliviousness of Shared Family Systems. You know, systems give attention to a few things. They can only do that because they're systems, they operate. In order for them to operate, they give attention to certain things. All other things they are oblivious to. They don't know that they occur, they don't deal with them. What happens is that the American system is oblivious often to the wishes, desires, needs, hurts of people who are poor, or they don't mean to be. They're not trying to be. It's just a part of a system that has been set up, and the system pushes back on you if you try to inform the system or to change the system. Then the system will put you back in its place and in place. But what we're going to do is challenge the system in a way. We're not challenging people, we're challenging the system so that the system can be reframed, reworked, so that all people can receive the rights that they so richly deserve.
Pam, I have another one here that was submitted. Bishop Johnson, you mentioned the mental and emotional health of our young people. Do you feel that our schools, churches, and/or community groups could work with our youth to deal with adverse childhood traumas? And if so, how?
Absolutely. I believe that we can do a great deal of help in that area. There's a book called The Deepest Well by Nadine Burke Harris. She is the Attorney General of California. She started 2 medical clinics in San Francisco, and she's been doing this work for about 20 years. And one of the things that she's found in working is that for a young person, they really only need one major thing to not have such a negative impact of these adverse childhood experiences. They need a caregiver who will support them, and protect them. That's what they need. In many cases, you would say, well, everybody has that. No, parents are stressed out themselves. Parents may be traumatized themselves. And so if you're religious, let me just say this to you from this perspective. You're a church person. We talk about generational bondage, generational curses. That's all we know. I'm going to be talking about intergenerational stress and generational trauma, how that's passed on to us. So yes, I believe that there are 6 areas, I don't know if I can come up with them right now, that can help. Sleep, exercise, mental health, important, stable relationships, being able to have stress reduction techniques. And there's one more, I can't think of it, but you know, when you're 70, if you get 5 out of 6, you feel good.
I understand, Bishop Johnson.
True.
All right. Here's another question. What does the city of Akron have in place to address social determinants of health in the area of food and housing insecurity?
I would, that's a great question. I would encourage the person who submitted that question to go to the city website, look up the Racial Equity Social Justice Task Force. Pretty soon our report will be there, and you will see that we have a subcommittee in both areas, in health and also in education, also in housing. We have subcommittees that are addressing each of those, and that will be putting forth recommendations to the mayor in order to address these things. So I can't give those off the top of my head, but we are working on that right now. And you can go read about it and see shortly, probably in the month before January is over, our report will be submitted and it will be on the website, and we will have recommendations in each area in order to move forward. Here, I'm really proud of the work that has been done, but I want to give you another recommendation, an area that we normally cities don't deal with. We have a communications subcommittee, which Ms. Carla Davis is helping, was over and helped to run. The communications subcommittee is to make sure that not only we are addressing these other areas, but that we are bringing people to the table so that they can be heard. So we can create communication going back and forth, because we're trying to build trust. The element that is missing in most of what we're talking about is trust. I won't take the vaccine. Why? Because I don't trust the government. I'm not going to go to church. Why? Because I don't trust. Trust is the element that is important in any healthy, productive relationship. And Stephen Covey said, we must move at the speed of trust. If you move faster than that, you'll find out you'll have to slow down later on to try to create relationship. If you move at the speed of trust, you'll be able to move faster later on, because you will have created the trust necessary. And let me make a statement before we end, because I think that in all of the places and all of the committees and subcommittees and things and work that I do in this city, I see a fallacy that gets us in trouble. It's an American fallacy. And the fallacy is we can do work without knowing one another. Let's set this goal. We're going to do this. Here's what we're going to do. And sometimes I just stop and, you just know I have a bad name some places, because I'm like, look, I don't even know you. In order to get to where we need to go, we need to create a relationship so I know you, so that when this stuff is tested, we don't break apart and it doesn't fail because of our inability to walk together as a group.
Pam and Bishop Johnson, I think that hit my last question. It was, what recommendations would you suggest on how we could address and break down the barriers, misconceptions that the Black community has towards taking the vaccines? And I think you touched upon it a little bit in terms of the trust factor.
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to end, but I think it's a powerful place, because sometimes the other side is not stated, and I get to hear a lot of these arguments. I'm on a lot of podcasts, and it's almost, sometimes we almost flog people who don't take the vaccine. What's wrong with you? Is there something wrong? But yet, if you looked at our history, not just the Tuskegee event, but there are numerous events across time where we have lost trust. Things have been done that have impacted us. And so even though you may feel that there are conspiracy theories and all that, that's not without merit. There is some merit there. The problem is that it can hurt you in the long run if you can't deal with those kinds of things, because it may be blocking you from getting what you need. I did a sermon that I thought was very powerful. I don't know, you have to ask my members, but it's on the 4 lepers. The 4 lepers are sitting outside the city, and they said, there's 3 things here. Number 1, if we sit here, we die. If we go into the city that's famine, we die. Let's go over to the enemy. And if we die, we but die. That's all we can do is die. They went to the enemy and found out the enemy was gone, and they could pick up anything that they needed. And I took that and I made an analogy out of it for African-American people. You may think the government is the enemy, but God may have placed them there for such a time as this, to provide a vaccine to help save our lives. We are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and we have to help people to understand that.
Thank you so very much, Bishop Johnson. We do truly appreciate your thoughts, your challenges, your wise counsel. And I know that our audience is very appreciative. There have been many comments coming in thanking you for your presentation today. I would also like to, of course, very specifically thank the Eta Tau Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity for partnering with the library for all these years now. And we are looking forward to this relationship continuing on for many more years. We do have more questions, but not enough time to get to them. I apologize for that, but our lecture is limited in time. So thank you so much for participating. And thank you to everybody for attending. It was wonderful to have you all here today. And I trust that you will all remain and hope that you will all remain safe and healthy. Thank you so much.
Bless you. Have a great day.